Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, the 10th, and we are now 15 days down in the lockdown. Obviously, Ramaphosa announced another 2 weeks that will be instituted on the back of the first 21 days. So we'll continue with these webinars as we go, just to continue just chatting around property and the various questions around it, and try and just keep the continued sort of debates going. Today we're going to be chatting about sort of the legal financial aspects around property acquisition, particularly off-plan property, why it's a good idea to buy off-plan property. So I've got a couple of points which we're going to just go straight into. So first of all, I just want to go through an example. Let's assume you were looking at a 3 million rand property. Is that affordable? So typically the banks will look at about 30 to 40% of gross earnings, whether it be bought in a private name or jointly, so a husband and wife as an example, or two brothers or whatever that may be. They'll look at the grouping of the income, and typically 30 to 40% is what they'll lend against. So as an example, combined income of say 80,000 Rand will get you a bond of grant of between 24,000 a month and 30,000 a month, which will service roughly a 2.4 to 3 million Rand property after the deposit's been paid. So as an example, if you were buying a 3 million Rand property, you put 300,000 Rand down deposit, you'd have a debt of 2.7 or a bond of 2.7, which equates to roughly about 23,000 Rand a month. So you'd need to be earning about 65 a month as a cumulative gross number to afford or to be approved in terms of the banks. The bond originators, as I've discussed, their jobs, they're companies that work very closely with the banks, and their job is to get you the best deal possible with the various finance institutions that don't charge a fee for that. I think they'll get a fee from the bank for bringing in the work for them or the business. So it's actually a really good service to use. It's not something that you have to take, but you can get 3 or 4 options and decide, what you want to do, and you've got a much bigger, broader spectrum of offers to look at. So what happens to the deposit? We talked about that 300,000 as an example. Very important is that let's assume you bought a product or a property that was off plan, about to be constructed over a period of 2 years. That 300,000 sits into an attorney's trust account, usually a very reputable attorney on a larger project. So the trust account will set up a specific account for your funds. It's invested, and the interest earned on that's probably in the region of sort of 5 to 6.5%, somewhere around there. All that interest accrues to you or to the deposit. So if it's, let's call it as a round number, 6% on 300,000, there would be about 18,000 a year, which would be added to that deposit. So when you come to pull your, actually transfer your property after 2 years, your 300 should be in the region of, say, 300 plus 18 plus 18. So sort of in the region of about 336, 340. The interest in those funds belong to the client. They're not touched by the developer. The deposit isn't touched by the developer. It's ring-fenced and only flows on transfer. That's a very important point, that is that obviously there's no risk to the buyer until such time as it's handed over. If the developer defaults or doesn't perform, then obviously the transfer doesn't happen and the funds are reimbursed. The handover process, so let's say now we're down 2 years down the line, you've handed over your unit or your unit's been given to you, it's snagged. You then as the client de-snag that unit, you accept it. There might be a list of things that need to be done, which are done by the builder. And then you effectively take occupation of that unit. That period between occupation and actual transfer, the legal process of transferring it into your name, usually takes between 6 and 8 weeks, maybe even 10 weeks if there's some jams in the deeds offices, etc. And in that process, in that time, you're paying basically the amount you'd be paying a bond, but you're paying it to the developer as he is effectively covering your bond until such time that it's transferred into your name. So the transfer period process, basically what happens is all the sale agreements have to be signed, the bond documents have to be signed, the banks have to, grant release. In particular, the Sabaya precinct is a whole lot of consents. So the master management, the associations, Tonga Hewlett, all the guys still have to sign consent papers to get your transfer through. You have to sign your transfer docs. It goes up to Peter Maritzburg, where it's lodged in the deeds office. Deeds office is an entity that processes transfers, and that once it gets to deeds office, it takes about roughly 10 to 14 days, and then effectively the property is listed in your name, and that's where we get that document called the title deed. It's almost like the pink slip to your car. Title deed is a document which shows that you're the owner of the property and you have a debt with the bank for a certain amount. So let's just talk quickly about the benefits of buying off plan. I mean, I've just gone through a couple of the basic sort of processes there. The benefits of buying off plan: very low legal fees, no transfer fees. Huge thing. Once again, on a 3 million property, it's in the region of 100,000 that you don't pay. 2, there's no hidden defects. So if you find anything wrong in the unit, like an aircon or a leaky toilet, or those things will get sorted out by the developer through the builder's contract, and the builder will be registered with NHBRC. So there's an indemnification or insurance policy behind your purchase. Unlike buying a property off someone else, basically most sale agreements read voetstoots, which means as is. So you take it as is. If you move in and you find that the floors are rotten and you have to rip all the floors up and redo them, it's all at your cost and your risk. So it's a massive, massive insurance sort of policy effectively to buy off plan from a reputable developer and builder. The developer backing also behind buying off plan is important, because the developer invests continued equity, cash, intellect into making sure that the properties are kept in good order, the common facilities are kept in good order, because often the developer will hold multiple units in every development, and he wants to make sure that his property continues to grow. So you've got a big brother basically propping up and keeping those assets really looking polished and growing in value. No maintenance on a lot of the off-plan developments, particularly freestanding or sectional title. However they may be, the body corporates look after the maintenance, the gardens, the landscaping, the swimming pools, the security, all of those things. Typically an off-plan development, such as what we're doing in Sabaya, comes with a full maintenance backup, and it's been managed and it's been planned. And that is, such a nice, convenient, time-saving thing, not to have to be thinking about and focusing on yourself. And that will be dealt with in the levies that are attributable per unit type. And then the other thing, obviously, is the perks of living in the estate. All the common facilities and security and amenities is why a lot of sectional title, off-plan, or even real right off-plan developments are flying in this current market. So we're going to jump straight into the questions. Hi Charles, when buying off-plan, what do you have to pay up front? So that'll be a function of what the banks lend you. Sometimes the banks will lend you 90%. Sometimes they'll lend you 80%, depending on your financial position, as per your earnings. So generally it's the deposit portion. You don't have to only pay 10% if you've got excess cash and you want to put 50% in, or you want to put 100% in. You can do that as well, but the bare minimum is usually in the region of about 10%, and then sometimes it'll creep up to 20%. If I'm unable to complete my sales process and need to pull out, what are the implications to me? Very good question. So during the 2-year construction process, as developers, we often see, for instance, an elderly couple, maybe one of the partners will pass away, and this dream apartment is no longer a dream, because let's say the man has passed away and the woman actually just going to go live with her kids, or there's no longer a need for it. We as developers really try our hardest to make sure we get that unit back on the market and sell it and refund the buyer all of their money. It's the way we like to do it. If we can't sell it immediately, we'll often hold it, and then on selling it, we'll release a deposit, because ultimately we don't need to gain off someone else's predicament. So we will, us as developers, generally try and make sure that the bulk of the funds are refunded. The price of the unit, is that including legal fees, or is the legal fees added extras? So generally all costs are included. So agents fees, legal fees, or transfer fees aren't much at all. It's basically the only extra cost over and above the 3 million rand unit would be your deposit, generally to your body corporate, which is a one-off thing, and that varies from sort of 5,000 to 10,000 or whatever the number is. It's almost like it goes into the body corporate fund, and then just actually the legal fee to doing the transfer. Most of the time, the interest accrued on the deposit more than covers that those numbers. So generally, there's very little to actually put in into the property other than the initial deposit. Jackie says, do all off-plan properties have no transfer fees? So yes, they do. No transfer fees when you're buying directly off the developer. So off-plan basically means, it's obviously you see the plan of it, it doesn't exist, but you're buying it off the developer. If you can still buy an off-plan developer unit from someone that's actually already purchased it. So in that case, you would have some agents fees and some transfer fees. So it's always good to buy directly off the developer. What capital appreciation do you think people could experience in buying off plan in the current market? And what do you think is the ideal off plan lead time? Okay, so good question. So we still see particularly good location, secure estate living, so apartments, freestanding complexes, duplexes, all of those things. As long as they're in a secure estate environment, in good locations, we still believe that during the construction process, you'll see in the region of 7 to 10, maybe even 12%. If it's a really nice located and nice developed, nice design scheme, and then generally thereafter, once you take ownership, anything between 6 and 10%, so averaging about 8% is what we see currently and have seen over the last 4 years. Sometimes, for instance, the smaller units can actually shoot up and maybe even go up to 10 or 12% increase in value per annum. And obviously, the other question is, versus how does that compare to a freestanding property, going and buying a freestanding home in a neighborhood? Typically, the neighborhood properties are performing way worse than that. So some of them zero growth, and I would say maxing out at sort of 2 to 4% in the current market. How do I know that the deposit that I invest is protected? Good question, Pam. It sits in an attorney's account. You get monthly statements. It's basically non-touchable. So let's say it's banked with Investec or ABSA or whoever they are. You get a monthly statement from that legal entity that's holding it, showing you what your deposit's doing and where it's going. Basically the trust account is particularly in your name, so the funds are reserved for you, and under no condition can the developer touch them in any way. Craig says, hi Charles, I took ownership of my off-plan investment in October, and as far as I'm aware, the bond hasn't been registered yet. I've signed all the bond reg docs 2 months ago, but haven't received notification the bond's gone through. So yeah, Craig, unfortunately, this coronavirus has basically shut everything down about 3 weeks ago. So I know that example, I think we were probably in about week 5 and ready to go through the process of actually lodging and transferring. When the deeds office shuts, often what happens is everything just goes on ice, and we'll see a significant delay once it opens, because you'll actually have quite a bit of a backlog. So at the moment, that sort of 8 to 10 week process is going to be a bit lengthier because of obviously this significant impact and unusual impact that this disease has had. So yeah, we do expect some delays on the back end of it. Eric says, yeah, do you also receive interest in your deposit? 100%, Eric, you do. Yeah, typically, as I was saying, sort of 5 to 6% is the norm on the investment amounts and trust accounts. Megan asks, are there any hidden costs to keep in mind? So no, Megan, usually the bank bond raising fees can be amortized into the payment of the bond. As I said, there are some small legal fees for the transfer, not transfer fees, but legal fees to go through the deeds office, etc. They usually will be covered by the interest on the deposit. So there's actually buying off plan actually has no other hidden fees. What tax benefits are there when buying off plan? Good question. So buying off plan, if you buy on your own personal entity and it's a unit that you're looking at moving into, you get the capital gains exemption. I think it's the first 1.5 million, if I'm not incorrect. So basically, any capital appreciation up to 1.5 million is tax free if it's property you're living in your primary residence. Pam says, I have issues with my bond application with my bank. Do you get involved, and is there any way you're able to assist? So yes, Pam, we do get involved. We also can facilitate that with, as I mentioned up front, the bond originators. There's 3 or 4 bond originators we work really closely with, and they are excellent at facilitating that process. So that's certainly the route that we will go, and it's something that these people do every day, and they often come back with some phenomenal deals. Taryn, I buy now and the transfer will only take place in 18 months. Is it right to say that I only pay my first installment then? And can I sell before then if I cannot afford it as expected? How does that work? So good question. So yes, you buy now, you get the capital appreciation of as the process. So let's say it's 2 years and you bought a 3 million rand unit, and by the time it's built, it's worth 3.5 million. If you choose not to take it, the developer will obviously endeavor to try and sell it on. He might even sell it for, let's call it 3.3, just to get rid of it and flick it over. But if you do not own it, you cannot partake in the upside. So you really, if you want to pull back, your best case is you're going to pull back without having any costs or any ramifications, but you can't earn on the upside of what that property is generated if you don't own it, because effectively it's not yours. So you actually can't earn that upside if you don't own the property. Okay, guys, I want to just keep this quite tight. So just a final 1 or 2 minutes is, obviously we're in a serious, economic issue at the moment. The disease is obviously going to have ramifications going forward. But once again, we really believe that property and key location-based property off-plan is the way to go. It's obviously, we've talked about stock markets and all the various foreign currencies running. So just keep in mind that if you're renting and you're paying, 15, 16,000 Rand a month, have a look at what your bond payments would be if you were in your own place and paying off your own bond. It's really important. So just going back to an example, which is actually going to be logged, posted onto our Facebook site at Devmco Property Group. We've done an example of a 2.5 million Rand property that's been bought in year -2, so at the very beginning of launch. And we just show you at an 8% growth by year 8, so that's i.e. 10 years, so -2 plus the 8 years, so -2, -1, 0, and then 8. 10 years later, the value of that property at an 8% increase is 5.38 million on your 2.5. And if you put down a 10% deposit, that represents 1,152% return on your capital over 10 years. So that's something that just please have a look at. I'll just give you some stats. So in year 0, assuming an 8% growth, you've made 420,000 on your 250. Year 5, which is 3 years after you initially put your deposit down, you've made 1.1 million on 250,000. So these key locations are certainly worth investing in. If you're paying rent, get out of that zone. Get into your own property and pay off a capital appreciating asset that can assist you going forward. So my advice is invest wise. use these low bank rates that are around at the moment. We're expecting another interest rate cut, so get involved. I know there's a lot of uncertainty around in the market at the moment, but good property and good locations will never fail. Even if it takes a little dip, time will heal it, and we've seen it over and over again. So anyway, enjoy your Easter Friday. God bless South Africa. Have a great weekend. Thank you very much.